Hello, so this is the last pages I'm going to read to y'all. This is Outliers, The Story of Success by Malcolm Gladwell. And again, to me, we're looking at the capitalist version of success, like the people who make a lot of money and tend to be like upper class, like the ones they make movies about. Okay, so the Irish and Italian immigrants, one page 148, who came to New York in the same period didn't have that advantage. They didn't have a skill specific to the urban economy. They went to work as day laborers and domestics and construction workers, jobs where you could show up at work every day for 30 years and never learn market research and manufacturing and how to navigate the popular culture and how to negotiate with the Yankees who ran the world. Or consider the fate of Mexicans who immigrated to California between 1900s and the end of 1920s to work in the fields of the big fruit and vegetable growers. They simply exchanged the life of a feudal peasant in Mexico for the life of a feudal peasant in California. Quote, the conditions in the garment industry were every bit as bad, unquote, Sawyer goes on. But as a garment worker, you were closer to the center of the industry. If you are working in a field in California, you have no clue what's happening to the produce when it gets on the truck. If you are working in a small garment shop, your wages are low and your conditions are terrible and your hours are long. But you can see exactly how successful people are doing, and you can see how you can set up your own job. I realize this seems strange to refer to the Jewish immigrants as lucky when families and relatives they left behind in Europe were on the verge of extermination by the Nazis. But yeah. But in a sense, like as immigrants, they still were able to get, for example, when you work in the garment industry. So we're talking about the immigrants who in, let's say, 1889, Louis and Regina Bourgonet boarded an ocean liner in Hamburg bounded for America. Louis was from Galicia in what was Poland, and then Regina was from a small town in Hungary. They slept on straw mattresses and such, and then they ended up having a garment store. And so, yeah, Bourgonet. What Bourgonet was getting in his 18-hour days was a lesson in modern economy. He was learning market research. He was learning how to plug himself in the popular culture to understand new fashion trends. So yeah, he realized his only chance to undercut bigger firms was to convince wholesalers to sell cloth to him directly, eliminating the middleman. Him and his wife, they ended up knowing about sewing and having a sewing business. When Bourgonet came home at night to his children, he may have been tired and poor and overwhelmed, but he was alive. He was his own boss. So yeah, we've seen this a lot with, I could be poor, but if I'm working at a job that doesn't, let's say, feed my soul, my interests, if I feel like I'm just punching in a clock and everything's out of my control, you're just stagnant. You're not growing, and it's a horrible existence. And a lot of people feel that way on their jobs. Whereas if you had something that you can work towards, you can figure out, there are problems you can solve, and it's not like impossible, then that's what creates meaningful work, I feel like. Because again, the work is meaningful for you. You can keep on doing it. So again, he was his own boss. He was responsible for his own decisions and direction. His work was complex. It engaged his mind and imagination. And in his work, there was a relationship between effort and reward. The longer he and Regina stayed up all night sewing aprons, the more money they made the next day on the streets. Right? Kind of like those little games, apps they give us, like about farming and building a restaurant. The faster you can make the food, the more customers are going to buy it. And as you get faster, you're going to make more money and get more rewards. But life isn't even like that for everyone. So those three things, autonomy, complexity, and a connection between effort and reward, are, most people agree, three qualities that work has to have if it is to be satisfying. So autonomy, being your own boss. Complexity, again, it's not like you're stuck knowing 1 + 1 is 2 and stuff like that. Like you're stuck in kindergarten and pre-K. It's like actual work that engages your mind, and it's not in an impossible manner. And then a connection between effort and reward. Like, if I do this, I'm gonna get an A+. If I do this, I will get a good result. But right now, for me, like, life has been very confusing, and these things are not adding up. But anyway, it's not how much money we make that ultimately makes us happy between 9 and 5. It's whether our work fulfills us. And I do believe that work that fulfills those three criteria is meaningful. Being a teacher can be meaningful, a physician is meaningful, and so is being an entrepreneur and the miracle of the garment industry, right? Like Louis Bergenet, when he came home after seeing that child's apron being created, he danced a jig. He hadn't sold anything yet. He was still penniless and desperate, but he knew he was going to make something of his idea, and it was going to require years of backbreaking labor, but he was ecstatic. But it didn't seem like a burden to him. Same with Bill Gates and the Beatles when they were playing 8 hours a day, 7 days a week. And I understand this mindset in the sense that, like, there are poor people, and we've seen it before, where it's like they get this one opportunity and job and it makes them so happy that it's like for a moment you do forget about being poor and you're absorbed into like what you're doing. So yeah, I do understand that statement. But also, yeah, labor and working, a lot of people hate it, but again, it's mainly the jobs. It's kind of like retirement. Some people will say, oh, I'll never retire, but then they work a job where they just sit in a chair and they don't do nothing but look stupid, and they get paid for it. But then you have other jobs where it's like, I have to retire, and it's like the truck drivers driving long hours loading and unloading trucks, and people who like probably work with machinery that could cut them and lose hands and stuff. Like that job would be harder for an 80-year-old. So I just think there is definitely something to be said about that, because yeah, I can believe that. Like if I, let's say, made $12,000 a year, I'm pretty sure I could still live off of it if I enjoyed my job. Whereas when I'm working these jobs that I can barely stand on, it's horrible. So now he's talking about Jamaica and the American South during the same period of like slavery. So American South, no whites, no blacks, no mixing. In Jamaica, the attitudes were different, and that's because it was a massive slave colony where blacks outnumbered whites, and so there wasn't a lot of white women. So in West Indies, they had black or brown mistresses. One British plantation owner in Jamaica, who had famously kept a precise diary of his sexual exploits, slept with 138 different women in his 37 years on the island. Okay, that's a lot. Almost all of them slaves, and one suspects, not all of them willing partners, which, yeah, I'm sure he was not having willing partners. When whites saw mulattoes, the children of those relationships, as potential allies, because, they're half white, they look lighter than the darker people, and they could be closer to their culture. Mulatto women were prized as mistresses, and their children, once they lighter in turn, moved further up the social and economic ladder. Mulattoes rarely worked in fields. They lived the much easier life of working in the house. They were the ones most likely to be freed. And they were left a lot of money in wills. And then there was a cap on the money, which was £2,000, which was a lot of money back then. So then he does talk about how that lighter skin gave them an advantage. They had an ancestor who worked in the house and not in the field, having got full civil rights in 1826, who was valued instead of enslaved, who got a shot at meaningful work instead of being confined to sugarcane fields, made all the differences in occupation success 2 and 3 generations later. Daisy Ford, she inherited that legacy of privilege. Her older brother Rufus, who she lived with as a child, was a teacher and a man of learning. And teachers, they get to make up their own schedule, their own lesson plans. They get a lot. So one of my mother's relatives, because this is about Malcolm's family, she was white and light. Let's call her Aunt Joan. But her husband in Jamaica was Injun, meaning he was dark complexion with straight, fine black hair. And her daughters were dark like their father. One day after her husband died, she was traveling on a train to visit her daughter, and she saw a light-skinned man in the same railroad car. She took interest in him, right? What happened is something Aunt Joan would only tell my mother with the greatest shame. When she got off the train, she walked right past her daughters. disowning her own flesh and blood because she did not want that light-skinned man who was so light and desirable to know she had borne a daughter so dark. In the 1960s, my mother wrote a book about her experiences. It was titled Brown Face Big Master. Brown Face referred to herself, and Big Master was Jamaican dialect for God. Okay, guys, we're going to continue this.